to Lisa.
So our goals for you today are to feel really excited about teaching, which you probably already are, but we also want you to be really optimistic about it and open. We want you to be able to move against what is referred to as pedagogical solitude. And in this case, we want you to know that teaching is a community and that you're not out there by yourself. And this happens very often. You begin teaching, you get really busy with your work and prepping courses and exams, and all of a sudden you feel very on your own. But it's really important that you talk to your colleagues, you exchange ideas. Many times the most you learn is in that impromptu conversation in the hallway with a colleague. So it's really important to engage with your colleagues, with each other. You guys are kind of a cohort together as postdocs, so be sure to lean on each other. We want you to gain some strategies for course design, and Ben's prepared a really in-depth presentation for you on course design. And I'm here to kind of show you some BU resources, talk about technology, learner-centered syllabus, those sorts of things to help you get started.
Yes, and so we have a set of metaphors and similes that we'll be coming back to, maybe ad nauseum, for weaving, mapping, and scaffolding. And you'll see. This is just a taste of the images I have. So that's where we want to end up, right? These are our endpoints. These are our
big goals,
right? These are our destinations, hopefully. So this is the route, this is the plan. That's how we're gonna get there. We're going to do Lego, talk about a teaching challenge. We'll spend a chunk of time on course design via a framework called backward design. And I hope you all know it. If you do, great, because you can always do more of it. If you don't, then I think it's probably one of the most important things to know going into teaching. And it's something that people eventually figure out for themselves over years and years. Like you eventually get to it, whether you like it or not, whether you call it that or not. And then we'll have quick tips on creating a learning-centered syllabus, inclusive teaching strategies, your first day, teaching and technology, and then we might have time for reflection at the end. And we know from the survey of the forum that there's a huge variety of teaching experience in this room. Some people have a good amount of teaching. Some people, this will be their first time as teacher of record. So everyone is in sort of the general area of like early career teacher, I would say. Is that fair, Jane? Is that fair to say? I wonder if she can hear.
I'm about 4 years into teaching, so I don't know. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
Okay, nice. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
That's the plan. So here's the challenge for you, and we're gonna have to do a stopwatch. What's one challenge you foresee in your spring teaching? Use Lego to express it. What's one challenge you foresee in your use Lego to express that challenge?
That's what the Legos are for.
Being creative.
That's okay. That's a challenge. Right? Expression is a challenge. Jane, we're sorry we don't have Legos for you.
Jane, we might
No worries.
Jane, what if we make you draw something?
How about you draw something and share with us?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, great.
No letters, only shapes.
Debbie, would you please go check your email real quick?
Yeah, I'm gonna start a timer for you. We're gonna give you 3 minutes with these Legos, okay? And that's probably too much, but I hate to keep people away from Lego.
He's been playing with them for a week.
Did Debbie hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. She went to
Perfect.
office.
She went to her office, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Wow, nice. The date was Play-Doh or Lego. became,
Yeah.
ended with Lego, but
Cleaner.
cleaner than Play-Doh, right?
Yeah.
Play-Doh has that, did you know, I learned that the smell of Play-Doh is almond. That's what they put in there. to smell it.
I like the smell of Play-Doh.
Is it enough? I don't know. Probably chemical.
Probably chemical in there.
If
When I was a kid,
Lego-
we made our own.
Same.
Yeah, yeah. Flour, it's like flour, water, salt.
Yeah.
And I think some baking
that
powder or
like a
baking soda.
difference.
Yeah, it has a very different smell.
Yeah. it's missing a chemical.
And it dried out all the time.
Okay, just a little more time on your building and then talk.
Like, we started getting those 3 minutes.
I know, I'm lying about 3 minutes now.
Like,
Oh, Jean's drawing away. We're gonna have.
I like it. I'm using, I'm like, meta. This is TV, I don't know where to put it. Maybe it should be standalone.
Okay. I'm gonna cut you off. You can continue going.
Keep
but-
going.
But we're gonna go around and say what it was that you're made, what you made and why you think it's gonna be a challenge.
So I see the reading base as kind of like what I have time for and what the semester will allow, and like all of this disorganization as kind of everything that I'm like thinking about in terms of like, you know, readings and questions and what I want to talk to students about. So I think a challenge that I'm gonna face is just like narrowing things down and not doing too much and keeping organized and sort of like hitting the mark when it comes to what students have the capacity and time and like ability to engage with. And I think that'll be a challenge because I think, yes, what am I teaching? I'm teaching a seminar on homelessness, and that's like my main research area and something I think about a lot. And so thinking about leveling that correctly for the audience and like what they will be able to take away from it and, you know, what things to focus on, would be kind of like the challenge.
Thank you. Austin, did you share with them?
I think mine kind of has a shaky foundation, like fall, which is what I'm concerned about in terms of like just having too much going on and then also meeting students while they're at and kind of balancing that between. I think there were also many things I read in undergrad that like I didn't understand it until 3 years later, but it was still really helpful to read it. Like I was kind of getting the gist of things before I fully understood it, which was okay. But then I think you can also alienate students that way. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Here, Debbie, you can put it up here if you want. As a working one.
Because the driver lost the phone number.
Ah,
So it's warm-ish and there should be plenty of paper in there.
okay, thanks.
Okay, well, one I said creativity is because a lot of times when we want to pass across information, we have different populations in class and you want to pass it across the way that, at least in several ways that will be applicable. Now, you come from a particular social environment and that's not necessarily applicable to every single person in the class. So there's that limitation, even if you sort of socialize or re-socialize yourself in society. That was from based on seeing how creative she was from herself. Right, so another one is handling students, managing students in class. So you have people who speak up and sort of dominate in class, and you want to make sure the person feels seen and heard, while others are also able to see and hear and participate and learn or learn opportunities with that person.
Okay.
I used every piece in my bag to demonstrate that the field of immigration is really big. And the biggest challenge I foresee is picking and choosing what to present, what I think is important for them to walk away with. And how that's
reflection of me as a researcher, but then also like formative for how they might engage with the field in the future and how it could spark interests in other topics. Really hard, because anything you do, it's like, well, it could be at the expense of something else that could be really important. So yeah, my goal was to use every piece in my bag to demonstrate that there's a lot to be covered, and obviously you can't do it all.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, I think the more so the process of trying to create a Lego structure was a metaphor for my teaching struggles, and in that, getting overwhelmed with lots of many small decisions, and as was already said, just trying to cover too much material, trying to cover a lot of big picture ideas, just maybe a unit that got away from me.
Ah, nice. Are you able to see?
Oh, yeah.
There we go, thank you.
Jane, do you want to?
All right, Jane,
you wanna
we'd like
share
to
ours?
see your drawing.
Yeah.
Thank you for including me. I know this is probably a little awkward for everybody.
That's
but
okay.
I've also got a nice advantage, I think, of getting to draw. So I was able to do almost like like a cycle.
Okay.
So one of the pieces, I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Connecticut. And one thing that I've found with students here that can be really challenging is that initially, like, we can read a text together or a study together and pull out like a key concept. And I feel like we can do this together in class relatively easily. But then it's always so important for me that students are able to kind of ground their understanding of this concept and its utility and some of their own experiences. And what I found is that sometimes it's this piece where you're trying to keep the precision and the clarity from the initial conceptual work, and then you open it up to try to engage students and get them excited to apply it to their own lives. And then sometimes we lose a little bit of that conceptual clarity. So I think finding, creative ways to really allow students to kind of embody and apply concepts while still holding on to that kind of conceptual and analytic clarity is something that I continue to try to experiment with different ways of making that work.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, thank you for sharing all of that. I think that different ways of embodying learning and different ways that you can allow students to kind of work with their hands, different learning styles, and these are all good things. So here's just a funny thing. Lisa, you asked DALL-E to respond to this question, and that's what DALL-E made, Gen AI's attempt at an image. So you can see how it's.
We had a lot of discussion about this image. It's a powerful image. Not necessarily in a good way, right? We had that discussion about it too.
Yes.
Position, bias, questions. It is reflective of sometimes a misconception of a teacher in a classroom.
What's DALL-E?
DALL-E is ChatGPT's image generative AI. It creates images. So you put in a prompt and it'll turn text into image.
Cool. That's something a lot of teachers are using then?
Some are, some aren't, some students are, some aren't. Just thought it would be a fun way to kind of see what's out there and look at it a little bit differently.
And Lisa does a lot with ChatGPT and Gen AI in the classroom, so that's her area. Okay, so.
And I'm working on a whole thing about bias in artificial intelligence, so that had a lot of bias in it. That's what I like to talk about it.
Yeah. Okay, so course design. So these big questions, like, what am I teaching? What do I cover? Why should I cover that? What do I want students to get out of it? What should students do? These are all the sort of like existential questions of teaching. And when we ask faculty, or when this researcher, Elle Fink, asked faculty what they dream of in terms of what their students will learn, here's what they come up with. Developing a deep curiosity, seeing the connections between themselves and their beliefs, thinking about problems and issues in integrated ways, taking pride in what they've done, finding ways to make the world better, to dissect problems, reconstruct them, all of these like really intense things that are not all about the content, right? So when I look at that list, I think like, wow, like if we are not intentional about putting these things into our syllabi, putting them into our assignment prompts, putting them into our calendars, then this will remain a dream. Like if we can't break these things down into workable pieces for students to do, this will remain a dream. And I often see syllabi where the learning goals or learning objectives are written in a very dry, formal, distant prose. And so a recommendation just off the bat is to try to be direct. Like, what do you hope for students? You should tell them that. Like the syllabus as a genre is not designed to actually connect with students, right? A syllabus is kind of a wall in some ways. Protective wall, right? Contract. Yes. So we've known forever education research, including scholarship of teaching and learning. SOTL, probably don't know it. No one really knows it, but it is the specific study of post-secondary teaching done by faculty, done by teachers. It's different from, K-12 education, but there's a lot of overlap. But we know that traditional pedagogies will not help every student learn. Here's something I came across recently. Actually, it was in a book about pedagogy of play, and I found it like really, really striking. Here's a neuroscientist saying it's literally neurobiologically impossible to think deeply about things that you don't care about. Like that's kind of an amazing idea, at least for me. And it reminds me that like if we want students to do those things, they have to think deeply, right? So we have to find ways to engage them that they care about.
Also, I think highlights the fact that because we're all thinking deeply about our teaching, we care about it.
Exactly.
That's right. Yep. So I'm gonna suggest, or I'm gonna put forward this idea of backward design as a way to help students care or invest, or at least to engage, get students to care about something, right? To think deeply about some aspect of your course. Because in some ways, like we're all good students here. Like it didn't take much for our professors to like hook us on ideas like in certain areas, right? But most students, especially if it's a gen ed course or not required, right? A lot of them won't remember. They're not going to remember when things are going so fast for them. They're anxious. It's just there's too much. Okay, so traditional teaching is focused on transmission, on coverage at all costs. Like you must coverage at all costs. Or a series of learning activities that are sort of disconnected, right? Like I want students to understand Shakespeare or this idea. So like the whole point is for them to understand it. So there's a difference between that and backwards design or learning centered design, where what you do is you begin at the end. Think about what you want students to be able to do in the future. So rather than thinking about like, here's the content, here's how they should understand it, think about what you want them to do, like at the end of the week, at the end of the semester, and even like 2 years. Like what makes the things stick in your mind that you learn, right? It's student-centered, it's transparent, it's about equity, and it's about like getting people to engage or care in some ways. Okay, so I'm just gonna bang through these and then you'll actually have time to look at your own syllabi and work on it. Yeah.
Well, we have access to the slides.
Yes.
So
Oh,
that
yes,
helps.
yes.
Oh yeah,
Define
we have some other things for you too.
Right. So yes, I'm gonna skip a little thing I was gonna say, but whatever. So these are the steps in backward design. What you do is first you think about where you want students to go. Like ideally, what will they take away, right? Some things they'll take away are durable, potentially durable, transferable things, like memories, like of how they were able to participate in a conversation. Some are less durable, like students crammed for the exam. They don't remember it in 3 months, right? They learned something, but it's gone. So you're identifying learning objectives. That is what you want your students to be able to do. And again, like what they want to do, not understand, what you want them to be able to do. And then from there, you think about what would be a suitable evidence of learning. So in other words, like, how will you know if your students have achieved the learning objective here? Like, if you want them to do these things, how are they going to demonstrate that learning to you? That is really like your assignments, major and minor, right? Your assignment is allowing your students to demonstrate what they've done, what they've taken away. And then finally, we have planning your learning experiences. And the truth is, traditional pedagogy works almost the other way around, which is like my experience was definitely in teaching. I'll be like, okay, I want to teach students about this poem. I want them to understand the topic of this poem, the form of the poem, and I plan learning experiences around that. And I do the learning experiences that I've experienced myself, right? And so but I never really thought about what's the thing they're going to take away. Like, what are they really going to take away, and how does that connect to the other thing they want to take away? So, you know, we're going to read this thing, and then I want them to understand it. We're going to talk about it, and then write a paper. That's learning experience centered teaching, not student centered.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
So, in my teaching, when I started in musical, first off, I used backward design for about 13 or 14 years before I knew that's what it was, because it just made sense to me that you would want to know what they should learn, and then you design your course around that. Backwards design, eventually I started to figure out a really great way was you want them to take away all of the things that you all stated you want your students to take away from your courses are not content related. So think of your content. Many times we teach in analogies or we give examples. So think of your content as the example that you're going to use in teaching your students what you want them to take away. You want them to take away an application, so use your content as the problem, and then how do they apply to that? And that helps you introduce and cover content that you might be required to cover that's necessary for the understanding, but the exercise itself is the learning experience. So don't think of, I have to cover all this content. Think, I want them to have these experiences and I want them to have these skills that they can transfer and use in the real world and in other courses. I'm using my content to get the point across.
Yeah, it's almost like content's a vehicle.
Yeah,
They're not
the
gonna
content's a
remember content
vehicle.
unless they become an expert in that field. They do it every day. Right?
And you do end up covering a lot more content that way than you would initially if you just tried to cover content.
Okay, thank you for saying that.
Mhm.
That's my experience too. Like I taught for years without this framework, and then I'm like, oh, this makes so much more sense.
Yeah.
Now I can just think about what are the really big things I want people to take away and work backward from there. Okay, so like here, so there are different kinds of learning goals. There are taxonomy of learning goals. There are foundational, application related, integration related, human, caring, and learning about learning. And you're going to see that in more detail in a minute. But an example is like the most basic way of learning is to memorize and remember, right? So like I want students, 1 year the course is over, I hope they remember one main theoretical framework and why we learned about it, right? That would be a foundational kind of goal. A human goal is to keep developing awareness of their own capacities with language, to learn it, to listen actively in team settings. That would be a goal around like human interaction ethics. Caring here, like, wouldn't it be great if we continue asking the kinds of questions that you brought up in that class, right? To explore how language is constantly changing. And then the last one is really meta. It's like their knowledge of themselves as learners. Okay. So that is the end of like information I'm giving you. Now we're gonna encourage you to think, pair, share. You heard that term before? Think, pair, share?
Yeah.
Think, pair, share, pizza.
Pizza.
Think,
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
Pizza, think, pair, share. So like,
I try to make it easier, like.
I'm with you. I'm gonna do it. So what I want you to do is get pizza and then think and write about what do you.
Somebody already told me.
your students, what do you, above all, because this is gonna, actually what's gonna help you narrow. Like, I loved your, you got the small platform, right? Small platform is like how much time you got, right?
Mhm.
And how much capacity people have, and all these things, and they're spilling off. But when you really think about it, like, what are the things that you really want students to come away with? That'll help you cut. And you know what feels good? Cutting stuff out of your syllabus.
Yeah.
At first, it feels terrible.
Yeah.
It's like editing or revising your paper. Then you begin to.
No, I saw the further reading section.
Exactly. You always
Yeah.
have further reading. Yeah.
Yeah.
You go back to the examples from the previous slide.
Yeah.
Also
Mhm.
very helpful to do this.
We have,
Oh, yeah.
we have them for you, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can getting a little ahead.
We're getting a little ahead with these, but
We want you to think like generally, just what's the, like, don't get bogged down in the language yet. Like,
Yeah.
what do you want people to come away with? You can have two categories that makes it easier, like at the end of the course, but then the ultimate category, like where real learning happens, and they remember 2 years
Mhm.
later or a year, right? What do you want them to remember when they look back on that one semester they had with you? You were one of 4 courses they were taking. They were busy juniors. They were worried about 5 other things. What do you want them to keep it?
I think it's facilitated also.
Yes.
So
Yep.
everyone's
Yep.
getting shot.
I'm gonna get piece.
hey, then to the next slide,
Oh.
questions there.
Yeah.
The definitions are on this.
Okay, yeah. And if it would help, maybe you do want the verbs, because it's like there are a bunch of verbs that are associated with each kind of learning goal. So like for application, for foundational knowledge, it's defining, describing. Right?
Jane, do you know Fink's taxonomy? It's similar to Bloom's.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Repeating, restating, summarizing, like those are all foundational things. You probably don't want them to remember to restate, right? And you probably want something beyond that, but.
Will that be like the slides? I thought it might have been thrown downstairs. And I was so hard. I'm like,
Was it Debbie?
probably.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Yeah.
Well, the delivery person.
It was a
Up the
delivery.
tip.
I was wondering that
Take a
too.
tip. That's cool. I imagine how we were delivering. Probably going. Smell it all day.
Good point.
That was not the case for me at first. Definitely drank a lot of stuff, but. Obviously.
So while you're thinking about your course, kind of what you want them to take away from it, part of the Think Fair Share activity is to actually pair up with someone here at the table, or since there's such a small group, you can even pair as one group and kind of discuss what those are for your individual courses.
This is the kind of thing that's.
It's our
funny
working
because, like,
lunch.
This is the kind of thing that's funny because like. You overthink it, you might get in trouble. Like, what's your gut response? So like, what do you want them to take away? Because deep down in your subconscious, you probably already know what you want them to take away. Yeah, I'm gonna give you 30 seconds. You guys are really doing the think part intensely. Some people.
I am thinking about it. And I'm also wondering in what context, when you're thinking about, because it's sort of the hard rock. Between the hard rock and something.
Oh, yeah, yeah, rock and roll.
Sorry.
There's a hard rock and a hard thing.
And halfway, so it's like, and you're thinking about it because schools, universities also have these larger goals they want you to meet, and these are really lecture focused. So you hit goal one of it, and they are very, very content and lecture focused. So how do you divorce yourself from that and make sure you're hitting both the who pays the piper part and meeting your own aspirational teaching goals?
Yeah. And how do you, what are your own values?
Yes,
Your own
exactly.
values, right?
Exactly.
Versus like what, you're all, it sounds like you're pretty lucky in that you have control over your solo buying. Mostly.
You do? Okay.
Mm.
I'm not teaching, so,
Okay.
but in my trying to learn.
I know that there's some postdocs at BU, I know that maybe in VLOC and like human development or something like this, where they're given like a 300 level course, and they're basically given like, this is week by week what you do. So they don't get to design. They're working within someone else's framework. So
But when I had an experience with a professor, I was a TA, and thinking about what we've said here since the beginning, she was so focused on, oh, they have to get this content. And I felt like I feel like I'm just preaching at the students. There's no room to think.
Yeah.
And I'm actually saying as an outsider, like I'm preaching at them. I'm not giving them room to think. I want them to be able to also say. And surprisingly, when they would write papers for the class, it was always like, write this paper and write that paper. There were so many assignments. So it was always assignment driven or what.
it's activity driven.
It was reading or textbook driven. It was like people were telling them how to think. And these are young adults who already possibly have their own perspectives. And even if you want to push them in a particular direction, it's not. I don't think that was the way.
Yeah.
So it was. So this is what has got me.
That's where using.
And it was very difficult to. Sometimes I'm like, I feel like this is what students want, even as a DTA eventually. I feel like this is what. I don't think she got what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
That's where using content as the vehicle can be very helpful. So you're covering the content, right? You're covering the content. How it's being covered though is up to you. Do you cover it by standing in front of everyone and just kind of regurgitating the content to them? Or do you create a case study assignment that involves the content that students have to engage in the content? Or do you present a world problem in which students have to use that content to solve it? Those are ways to cover content. Students have to understand the content in order to apply it. But they're learning how to use it as opposed to just memorizing it and not knowing what to do with it. That makes sense.
Well, it does in some ways, and I think what you're talking about also speaks to the level of that person also has maybe some 20% control. Here you have to teach exactly what, and you couldn't give assignments or anything outside of the syllabus.
Yeah.
So this was how it was.
Yeah.
Like read this book, read the text, and read this text and talk about this. Some of the leading questions you can ask them.
Yeah. Like
But I understand. I get what you mean.
Yeah.
So
Actually, I was going to ask James, you wanted to chime in here because you have some more teaching experience. So
To a specific, the prompt or a specific question?
to the prompt. Yeah.
Sure. So I am currently, I was a little bit late to this meeting because I was teaching my last version of this class, but I'm going to be teaching the same kind of class at BU in the spring. So I've really been thinking about how I want to make some alterations to the syllabus that I'm currently working with, but it's a sociology class in the gender and health. And I think like the big overarching thing that I want students to remember or be able to walk away from, it's like a 300 level here, but at BU, I think it's going to be a 200 level. The big overarching thing that I want students to be able to do is like ask sociological questions and know how to collect and interpret evidence to answer those questions regarding gender equity and justice in healthcare. So I work with a lot of pre-med students in these classes typically, which is really fun, but an interesting kind of dynamic of trying to balance kind of bread and butter sociology major students with students that are hoping to be healthcare professionals and are really oriented towards the kind of medical track. So a lot of my learning objectives or are oriented towards kind of thinking about that sort of classroom setup and helping students learn how to sociologically analyze real world issues that they might encounter in the healthcare professions. So I don't know, that's kind of my overarching piece.
Yeah. That reminds me of what Austin said about providing a lens for students to think about problems later on. If you provide that lens, that framework for thinking, they'll be able to use that later on.
Yeah, you have to get them to care about the lens. You have to get them to see like,
Yeah,
that
to
lens
wanna
is
use it.
useful. Like, this is what this lens is for. This is why it's different from the lens, my main primary like professional lens, right?
Mhm.
Like this lens. So yeah, I get interesting to see how that looks in your assignments. Like you're doing this because, you know. Anyway, should we do to talk a little bit amongst yourselves about the,
Anyone else want to share?
I could share. I think I was thinking in terms of the more tactile things. I want them to learn how to revise things that they write, and sort of break down tasks into smaller parts and steps, and then also how to read critically. So how to like, if there's something that unsettles you with the text or something you don't understand, how to sort of turn those questions into critical engagement.
I have a tool.
Would anyone else like to share? I mean, we can move on to the next piece. Okay, let's move on then. So this is just time. This is just time for you to work and ask questions. So 10 minutes, I think. So here's the idea. If you don't have a syllabus, that's okay. You can start writing your learning goals now. I call them learning goals. There are lots of different terms for this. Learning objectives, learning outcomes. They're really the same thing. It's really just like, what are your goals for the student? Some people might make an argument that there are technical differences, but learning goal is fine. So the question is, think about your syllabus, think about the goals you've got so far on that syllabus. Take stock of those goals. Pick one or maybe two, or begin creating them. And think about how it really reflects your larger hopes for students. Think about how it squares with your response to the Maslin question about the adjectives, what you want them to remember about you, or think about you as a teacher. You can also think about how it relates to Fink's categories and its parts. So you might have a larger learning goal, right? But you can have sub-learning goals too. And this is about like narrowing too. You might realize one, this huge, that you, in order to do this big learning goal, you're gonna have too many sub things. You have to actually let go of it. So just quickly, so once you have a goal, now think about an assignment or a way or an idea for students to demonstrate learning around that goal. You can even, again, like plan beyond that, right? So like we're doing this, right? Think about your goal, think about the assignment that would allow students to do to sort of enact this goal. And then you could think about the scaffolding. This is what you do in class. Like these are the smaller assignments, right? That you do. So you can look at these resources on Backward Design as you work as well. And actually in this handout, you know what I'll do? I'll put them in the Padlet. Put this in the Padlet so you can get it. But there's all kinds of stuff in here. So like, this is the foundational. These are the learning goals by type. Then it gets really deep into this.
And this is something you can use when you're at home working on your syllabus and course design. The idea here today is to kind of develop one learning goal, kind of go through the process. That we go through the process together, think about your overarching goal. For example, Austin was talking about She wants students to be able to critically read. So use reading, be able to pull things out of that reading. That's your overarching goal. Okay, what little sub goals do I, well, I want them to read this specific paper. So there's content now being used to exemplify that goal. I want them to read this particular paper. These are the things I want them to get from this paper. Then go back and think about, okay, how do I create an assignment that students can show me they were able to think critically about it? Just kind of giving you kind of a step-by-step on how to work on a goal like that. And for Austin, there's a tool here at BU called Perusal that you can use for that. It's social annotation. And so the students can go in there and use that tool and start, putting things on it. Perusal's in Blackboard itself. You can be part of your grading, and students can then start showing that to you. Does it have to be an exam question? Does it have to be on a quiz? Does it have to be a written paper? No, not necessarily. There are multiple ways that students can express learning to you. So that's a way to break down a large goal using content as the tool to gear students through it.
Like the hardest and most basic thing you'll do is figure out your goal and then write your assignment prompt.
Mm-hmm.
What does that assignment prompt say? Right? What are you actually asking students to do? It's like whether it's a term paper or whether it's a video that you're asking them to make, whether it's an old school exam. So like that's the heavy lift between your goal, your multiple goals, right? And like what the assignment actually says.
You can do
Hold on.
We need the handouts.
And how long do we have to do all that?
About 10 minutes, just one learning goal. That's it. Just one thing from your course that you want them to take away, and how you might think about them being able to show you that they learned it.
Or if you have a syllabus, you go back and figure out which,
One.
how to revise, improve, right? Or online, like what you've got in your syllabus with like your values and these longer term goals. So you can think about the human dimension, you can think about all these different.
Jane, do you already use backwards design?
Yes, I was really lucky that as a graduate student, I was able to do a teaching certificate program at Western University, and they were really big about backward design and scaffolding. It's something that I still find really, really helpful.
Yeah, like I was saying, I did it for probably 12 or 15 years, and before I realized I was actually doing what they were, it just made sense to me.
Yeah.
Most faculty I talk to don't know what backward design.
But they do it.
But they do it. Or they don't, actually.
Yeah.
Or they do it in some kind of semi-conscious way.
Mm-hmm.
So
It really does help, I think, save time when you do though start to just realize, oh, I need to write a syllabus, and this is like the steps I'm going to take, thinking from the backward design perspective. It saves so much.
It does. It does. It saves time and frustration, and it also provides structure. It gives your course high structure, and high structure is very conducive to learning. Instead of walking in every day going, I think I'm going to cover this.
Yeah, coverage will bring you down. It will. And it'll make you lose your mind. There's actually in history, I'm gonna stop talking a second, but in history there's something called uncoverage.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, instead of covering everything in this period of time on this continent, what you do is you think about like, okay, here's my period of time, here's my continent or whatever. You do a deep dive on something that is applicable. So you're not covering and making people memorize. You're actually doing the opposite, doing a deep dive and people remember.
Less is more.
Mm-hmm.
The Google Doc is.
Oh no.
Sense, yeah.
Oh god.
It's.
I'm just
It's
gonna
okay.
I'm just gonna start blaming Google. Oh, it's not Google's fault.
It's restricted.
Um,
There you go. You should be able to get in there.
Sometimes though, I swear I've made it accessible to everybody and there's not, there's still.
It's not a sin to forget that. I think I do that
Is that on our drive? If I can share it to Jim?
I just put it on the Padlet.
Oh, it's on the, oh, she doesn't have the Padlet link. Let me see if I can pull that up.
I think I was sent a link maybe yesterday.
Yeah, you
but I'm
got it,
trying
probably
to
got an
Oh, it's
email.
inside? It's
Yes.
inside
Find
the
it. Do you mind
PowerPoint.
dropping it in the chat? That
Oh,
would
it's
be-
in the PowerPoint.
Okay.
Oh, I don't think I have a PowerPoint.
I put a link to the PowerPoint in the, in the chat. You didn't get it?
No.
Ah.
I see Yippee Pizza, but that's.
I think she did it
Oh, that's all you got.
after
You
did
joined
it.
after that. Okay.
Hold on, I'll put it in there. Hold
There we
on.
go.
Oh, thank you so much.
There you go. There's the PowerPoint.
I've
I'm
got it.
sorry, Jean. I thought you had it this whole time.
No, that's all right. It's my fault. Like I said, I was running late from my other
Oh,
class.
that's okay.
Sorry, I joined. a couple
All right,
minutes
and then let me
late.
see if I can find the Padlet link for you. Or it's in the beginning.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep, all the links are in the PowerPoint, so you have them all right now.
You have a Gmail address that you should never use, but you can use all the tools of Google. So people use Drive, people use all the tools, but they never use Gmail. You could.
Gmail, your VU Gmail goes straight to Outlook.
Yeah.
It doesn't,
it's like
yeah.
bounces off.
It links to Outlook, so it goes to your Outlook email.
Yeah, you have OneDrive.
But you have OneDrive and you have a Google Drive. Just the Gmail in it forwards directly to your Outlook. It doesn't, it uses your Outlook email.
Yeah.
Your personal Gmail accounts will work, but
Only use my personal.
Like I'm embarrassed to ask it, but do we all have Zoom? Because I'm still using my Vanderbilt Zoom. and
Yes.
I have Zoom.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Zoom
Yep.
for you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't
Yep.
know.
I haven't set it up, but
Yeah.
If you go to Zoom online, and when you go to log in, you go to SSO, which means single sign-on. It's down at the bottom of the Zoom window, and you use your VU credentials, and it'll open a Zoom for you.
these stuff. These are like also like things we use.
Yeah, little things like this. Yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah, I don't know, like students have a 45-minute limit on their Zoom. We don't, but.
Well,
you should
yeah.
not either.
Well, the other thing is if you're inactive for 45, it'll shut you out.
Yeah.
But if you are there and the time limit comes up, it'll ask you if you want to continue. Just say yes.
Could we have the instructions?
Oh, yeah.
Slides help, Jean?
Yes, this is very helpful.
Okay,
Thank you.
Good.
What can you give students?
Does anyone need any help, or do you have any questions about developing a learning goal?
No, I think the ones that came to me most quickly were like content oriented, and I'm trying to think about, what would be the right, or what are a few, sort of appropriate, like, more like skill or human or like the other area goals for like the level of class I'm teaching. Like,
Okay.
what are the kinds of things that
Mhm.
students might want to be practicing or should be practicing in like a 400 level seminar in sociology? So to start to think about that, and then I was skimming the resource you sent for some of my assessment ideas, because I think I want to think more creatively about assessment, but haven't been really thinking a lot about what that will look like yet.
Okay.
I know that's the opposite of backwards, but it's just sort of like,
No, but
how
it's
do you
hard.
think
No,
of
because you're
inspiration?
thinking about your content. So once you know what you want them to learn, that's where you can get creative with the assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah, like one little switch is like, think about what you want them to do with that content. What do you want them, because I feel like when people say they want students to understanding means so many different things. Like understand why, understand what, how. So like, what is it you want them to do? Because if they're at that point level, then they've already got some kind of grounding and to reflect on like they're at this level where they think they need to do in order to understand the field of sociology.
That if you're teaching about a seminar on homelessness, I'm sure you're going to be talking about a lot of policies, right? So thinking about policies, how do you make policy change, right? What needs to change? How does that change? One of your exercises could be writing a letter to their state representative, right? That's one of the ways that people try to instill change or to make their voice heard, that sort of thing. So, right, you've got a topic that has content, writing a letter to your representative, they don't have to send it, but they turn it into you. And in that letter, you give them criteria that they've got to meet. That is the content criteria. But what you want them to take away from this is that you can make change. You can write a letter to your state representative or to a senator or to a president or to the Secretary of the Interior is the one who might, but you follow my idea here is that you use the content is incorporated into the letter. So there's your content. 2 years from now, the students are going to be like, oh man, I wrote a letter to my senator. Maybe I could do that. And they're going to do that again. Right. So that's a way to know what you want them to learn and then coming up with an interesting way for them to apply it.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Maybe it's about experiential learning.
Mhm.
Yes, that's the
Yep. How about you, Austin? You come up with something?
Yeah, so I was thinking through and looking over my syllabus, I just realized I could cut a lot of the topical stuff that I taught last year, sort of, and how, like, because one of the learning objectives I had was to apply intersectionality theory, that's what the class is about, to a variety of topics. And when I listed them, I guess it's not actually that important to include all of these topics. And then I was thinking through one of the assignments I had, which were reading responses, which were actually, I think, more helpful in some instances in the paper. So like thinking about how to integrate those, because they were graded, but like very loosely, and you could like write your whole reading response about how like you didn't understand something, that was fine. But I thought that was helpful for the reading outcome goal.
So intersectionality, there's a really interesting quiz. In your email, find it. There's a really interesting quiz that you can take that you kind of answer yes or no on a whole bunch of different criteria. And then at the end of it, it kind of tells you what your intersectionality is, so that where you're a minority and where you're a majority, where you have privilege and where you don't have privilege. And so different with intersectionality, different parts of, different parts of you, some have privilege, some have don't. So for me, one of them is I'm female, so that's a disadvantage, but I'm white, so that is an advantage. That is a privilege, right? So it's about self-awareness and seeing your own intersectionality in a different lens. So I'll try to find the quiz. It's been a while. And I'll get your email and send it to you if it's something you'd like to use with your students. How about you?
I'm not a change, so I haven't used it about.
Okay.
I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of trying to speed things along. Because it's 5 after and I want to make sure they cover some of the other things for them.
Maybe you say at this point, like, is there anything you want to share about learning outcomes, or should we move on to the rest? I mean, you can move on. I mean, this is just to get you thinking. Like, you don't have to figure it out right.
Question. So I think for my assignments the last time I was teaching, they were very open. But I think sometimes students are like, okay, but what do you want? Like for the final, I let them do a creative project, and it could be anything except for an essay. And for about half the students, they did like these really like cool things, and then other students were just like really stumped. Like the freedom, I think, actually made it worse for them. Like they're like,
Limited freedom.
okay.
So,
Limited freedom.
it
Choices.
might be a question of like, if you're not clear about what the learning outcomes you're getting at in the assignment, then students sometimes won't know where to start.
Yeah.
So like, you're giving them this freedom, and part of the process might be for them to struggle with that freedom if you want them to do that.
Yeah.
But if you don't, then give them different options. But like, the question is like, what are they getting out of that? How does
Yeah.
it because there is research that shows that the more students understand why they're being asked to do something, the better.
Yeah, because I think similarly for the paper prompts that I did, they were very open, but it was like the thesis you pick, you have to provide evidence to support it. You don't need to pick a particular thesis, but I think like framing that within the context of like the learning outcome I have to create your own arguments, like I could emphasize that more. They're not just like whatever.
And that's something you can scaffold throughout the term. So you kind of start with really simple prompts in the very beginning of your course. And then as you move through the course, the difficulty and the freedom increases. So that by the end of your course, your students have been kind of guided through that creative process and ways to apply it. And when you get to the end of the course, they won't struggle as much.
Yeah.
They might still struggle with the creativity part of it, but how they're going to do it won't be as much of a struggle because they've had some experience in developing that ability.
The final thing, which is that this seems like students learn something about themselves when they're faced with that. It's like, what was the, maybe that's part of it. Maybe there's a better aspect of like, so like you did this thing, reflect on it. What was it like to have this choice? What did you learn about yourself? Like, you may even have like that meta. You might build that in if that's what you want. Okay.
All right, so let's move
Yep.
forward. We'll talk about some more practical stuff. So I'll switch with you. I'm gonna kind of take over here and talk about a learner-centered syllabus and how to kind of put together a syllabus that students will be more engaged with, and you're not dictating to them the course. And you can even, in parts of your course, allow your students to be a part of the syllabus creation project or portion of it. We'll talk a little bit about some of that. So the primary elements of a learner-centered course is going to be, kind of the straightforward stuff, which is your class and instructor information. Students need to know where to go, when class is, what room it's in, if there's any office hours that you may hold. All of that kind of stuff is really important. Students are going to look for that first. So that should be at the top of your syllabus. You should also include your course title, course identifier, any of those things for students. Any materials that they're gonna need, this is an accessibility thing. If you're going to require a textbook that they have to purchase, or if they have to buy any subscriptions to technology, anything that you're gonna require for the course, they need to know that ahead of time. So make sure that you list that. With PDF documents, if you're gonna write your syllabus as a Word document, a PDF document, it is recommended that you actually write it directly in Blackboard. But if you want to use a PDF and such, make sure that you have live links, provide links to where they can purchase those things. So let's say you're going to use Top Hat in your course. That's some technology here at BU. Well, students have to actually pay for Top Hat. So if you're going to require them to do that, provide them a link to the Top Hat site so they can go there and get that before class starts. You want to introduce yourself, include a paragraph that's a little bit about you, who you are, why you're here, your teaching statement, your Maslin kind of answer. So what's important to you in this course and what you personally want your students to walk away with. This humanizes you, it makes you more approachable, and students now have an understanding of why you're in front of the classroom with them and what you're trying to do for them. If you'd like to include a DEI statement or some kind of inclusive teaching statement, you can, of course, include that as part of your self-introduction, but that's a really great way to start opening up a safe space or brave space for students. Particularly, I was looking at some of the topics that you guys said that you're teaching, and some of those topics may have sensitive subjects or topics themselves. So you want to make sure that you're setting the tone for a space that students are going to feel comfortable and non-judged. Then you want to start looking at your learning goals, objectives, outcomes, whichever you'd like, however you'd like to list them. When you write your learning outcomes or your learning goals, you want to make sure that they're very clear and use engaging words. That's why we provided you with the verbs, with the Fink's taxonomy. There's another one called Bloom's taxonomy that's used in like K through 12 that has some of the similar verbs. You want to organize your goals. Some of this might seem kind of intuitive, but just wanted to state it. When you organize your learning goals, do it in the order you're going to teach it. It's a very simple thing, but imagine, right, if you're trying to follow a syllabus the instructor gives you and it's like all over the place. So make sure that it's well organized, it's in order. We tend to teach in units. I was in sciences, so we always taught things in units. If you have a unit, that's your overreaching goal, and then you have your learning objectives or learning outcomes and goals below that. Make sure that you're really clear about what they're going to be expected to do. So if you're going to be writing a paper, give them a brief description of what the paper is going to entail, what's expected. This way students know what's going to be expected of them throughout the term, and they're a little more prepared for those things as you move along, and they may have questions about them so that you can answer questions and get a lot of that kind of, I call it housekeeping, out of the way real quick. Provide descriptions of assignments. How are quizzes or exams going to be administered? Are they online? Are they on paper? Is it a weekly quiz? Is it a midterm and final? Those sorts of things. Be sure that you're very clear about how those different types of assessments are going to be provided, how big the assessments are. If you're going to give a midterm exam, let them know there's going to be multiple choice, fill in the blank, essay questions, that it's a combination of all of those things. Let students know that ahead of time. These things also, not only do they help students with preparation, but a really important part is it will limit and decrease the number of questions and inquiries that you get. Students are aware ahead of time. One of my favorite elements of a really good learner-centered syllabus is a course calendar. And this is where you give your course structure. This is where you say, okay, on lecture 1, this is the content we're going to cover. Here's the learning goals that we're going to be covering in this lecture. This is when the quiz for this is due. This is when the reading is due. This is when that sort of thing. So it's usually done as a table, put it together, and students can just read across the day everything that's involved in that lecture period. That provides you with really good structure as well. You know that those are the things that you're going to be talking about and discussing that day. So creating a good schedule. Don't put too much. That's the problem. And that's where a lot of times as instructors, we get really far behind because we think we can cover these 6 learning goals in a 50-minute lecture. And in reality, we can really only in-depth cover 3. So that's where less is more. When you create your course calendar, you want to, of course, include those due dates. if you have exam dates, give them the exam dates with a description of what's going to be covered. You could just say learning goals 1 through 6 are going to be covered on it. You can also, with your assignments and such, you want to show alignment with the learning goals that you have stated earlier in the syllabus. If you're not covering a learning goal in your assessment, then your assessment's not aligned with what you want your students to learn. So it's important to show that alignment, and it's a really good practice for yourself. It's a good kind of check, right? To make sure that you're aligning what you want them to learn with the activities and that you've built for them. So here's just a sample description. We just kind of wanted to show you a sample of a learner-centered versus a content delivered, right? So this is just what you're going to be required to read. You have to demonstrate research designs. You're then going to be asked to answer questions. You might think, well, that's a pretty good, that's telling them what they're going to be doing. But over here, you're doing that here. But before that, you're telling them why they're going to be doing that. And students, particularly students today, they want to know why. If they don't understand what this has to do with what they're trying to learn, they're not going to engage, right? They have to care about it. So this is telling them why they should care about it, because these are the things you're really going to take away from it. And then this is just a simple description, clarity of what the expectations are. So when you're describing these things, like you were saying, your students get a little overwhelmed by the amount of freedom they have in that project. But if learning about yourself and your learning and becoming a self-regulated learner is part of your goal in that project, include that up here. And so that's where the students will start to understand why they have so much freedom and what they should be doing with it. And that can help them focus. So here at BU, there are a couple of different ways. We don't have time to go into all of the different inclusive teaching strategies, but we wanted to provide you, and you'll have a copy of all of these links, that there are resources here at BU to really delve deep into inclusive teaching practices. The first is the Inclusive Pedagogy Initiative. Megan Sullivan at CASS, right?
She's in CGS.
She's in CGS.
One
Okay.
in the College of General Studies.
College of General Studies. Megan Sullivan is the director of that. And every year, every spring, CTL and the initiative, they give a 3-day, we do a 3-day workshop called the Inclusive Pedagogy Institute. And you can apply, register for it, and come and you spend 3 days learning all about different inclusive pedagogical strategies. There's also a resource here for navigating difficult or contested questions with your students. This is a really good resource considering some of the topics you guys are going to be teaching. This would be a very good resource to review. Here's another framework with some different checklists for assignments and lecture materials on equity-based teaching, and then a description on what's known as TILT, which is transparent methods in designing assignments. I'm going to move real quick into something that's really super helpful. This is called Universal Design and Learning, or UDL. There's a link to it in a document we're going to give to you guys from a initiative called CASS.org. UDL was initially developed for accessibility reasons, right? So students that might have visual impairment or audio impairment, those sorts of things. But it was found that the basic principles of this were also very applicable to pretty much any kind of learner. And it works really well for teaching. The example is, it was originally done in architecture. And the example was, there was an architect the guy who invented the automatic door. So he invented the automatic door for people in wheelchairs, right? But now with that sensor, it also works for people with groceries in their arms, or a baby stroller, or a shopping cart, all of that. So in Universal Design for Learning, you're designing something that is accessible and usable by everyone. So it's inclusive. It's an inclusive strategy. So the 3 primary elements or principles of UDL are engagement, representation, action, and expression. And this is a really great framework for creating assignments and helping you become creative in developing assignments, and also ensuring that everybody gets the most out of them. So in engagement, you want to create experiences that are going to keep them engaged, and you want students to become active participants in the actual learning experience themselves. Small strategies, think, pair, share, those sorts of things. In representation, you want to provide content in multiple formats. Include if you have, you're teaching a homeless policy, for example, give them a copy of the policy to read, maybe a video of an interview about a politician or someone that's talking about that particular policy, and then having an in-class discussion about the policy, or presenting an infographic about the policy. So those are ways to engage students in different ways that allows them to have some autonomy in how they learn the content, where they get the most from it. Then in action and expression, you want to provide them with choices to express it. So this is where your freedom, right, the limited freedom might come in. Instead of saying present it any way you want, you might say, okay, for this assignment, you can give me a podcast, a video, an infographic, or, you know, a sculpture or whatever. But you give them freedom of choice, but you determine the choices. And that can sometimes be really helpful for students. So on your first day, I'm kind of zipping through here. I'm going to skip over this just because we don't have time. So for your first day, don't teach any content. Don't cover content on the first day. I know your time, your little green square just got smaller.
This is 3 hours.
I know, I was gonna say that's like.
Okay. Oh, you're doing seminar. Well, seminar's different, so I'm thinking about it. I
Think about it differently, like
Okay.
in terms of reading, like maybe I'm delivering more than expecting them to have read a lot coming into it.
Okay,
I don't know. What do
No,
you think about that?
that's fair enough, but maybe for the first hour, don't teach.
Okay.
Okay, so for that first hour, no content. In a seminar, if you're doing a 50-minute course or an hour and 10-minute course, then no content on the first day. Couple of reasons. One, you do have that drop add period. So you're going to have students that aren't going to be there. They're going to miss that initial content, and that can be missing the first day of classes is like already they're about 10 times more likely to not do well by missing that first day. So that's really important. In that first day, let's just say first day, your first hour, we're going to talk about goals. You're going to talk about those learning goals, those big overarching goals. Don't go into all the weeded detail of each goal, just your overarching ones and what you want them to get from those different units or sections or goals. Then with no content, what you're going to do is use this time to start creating some classroom community. You want students to feel comfortable. You want to be approachable. You want them to know that you care, that you're supportive, but that you also have to provide some structure for them. One really great way to do this is you're probably going to have a lot of class discussions. So the first thing you might want to do is have a Google Doc, give them a link to it or a QR code to it and say, all right, let's go into this Google Doc and we're going to be touching on some sensitive subjects this semester. So I want you to go onto that Google Doc and I want you to write down how you think we should be carrying out these discussions. Should there be a time limit on the amount of time someone can speak so that you don't have somebody taking over the entire discussion? Should there be a limited number of times that someone can speak in a single discussion? What if somebody is really uncomfortable? Is there a safe word or something that someone can use to say, you know, hey, wait a minute, that's a little out of line, right? Different ways, types of respect. I think you have to be respectful. If not, there's a point loss or you have to leave the room, those sorts of things. But engage the students in that discussion and come up with those guidelines as a class. Everybody buys it. Everybody agrees to them. Everybody buys in. They're going to start discussing this etiquette with each other. And it also helps to teach some tolerance and some patience so that students can hear other perspectives. Otherwise, you can end up with 3 people kind of running all of the discussions. For those students that don't want to speak up in class, you sometimes have students who are really super shy. You can provide a constant Google Doc that they can go in and anonymously put their questions in. Then you can address those during class and the students don't have to be called out. You don't know who wrote the question or who made the comment. So there's ways, and now with all of the texting and that students do, they have a tendency to like to use that. And that's a really great way to engage a student who would not normally engage in that conversation. Brings in a much broader perspective. Ask challenging questions in the very beginning. You know, what do you want to get out of this course? Why are you taking this course? What are your goals in this course? Find out from them what they want, what they're asking for. And all of this is to help engage them and develop that kind of brave space for them to be able to speak and have an opinion and to be able to engage in the conversation, but feel comfortable doing so. Have you ever had an instructor you walked in and you're like, I am never going to open my mouth at this course? You don't want to be that. You don't want to be in that situation. So these are just some strategies. I'm not going to go through all of these. These are just some examples of some strategies that you can use to help create a classroom community that is inviting and open for everybody to speak. Getting students to engage in activities to know each other. I used to do one where the students had to pair up with somebody and introduce each other. And a little 3-question questionnaire. They would interview each other, and then I would then introduce Ben to the class, and Ben would have to introduce me to the class. So it's a way to get them to meet someone that they don't already know. Allowing them again to discuss and agree on their discussion etiquette, incorporating active learning. Another one here, I never did this one, but I had a colleague that would create small teams of 3, and those teams were responsible for each other throughout the entire semester. Did you do your homework? How come you weren't in class today? Do you need the notes? So that there was this little micro community within the class, so people were checking. It was a sense of belonging. Students felt that they were seen, that somebody was checking in on them. College can be really isolating. So it's important for them to feel like somebody's checking on them. You can go through those on your own. But I know there was some question about technology. So there's two pieces of technology I'll spend time on, and then I have a list of others here at BU. And then in our resource document, there's a link to educational technology that gives you a very comprehensive list of all the different tools available to you. And yes, you do have Zoom, we had that discussion. But Blackboard is your friend. Everybody hates it, but Blackboard is actually your friend, and you can really structure your course really well in Blackboard. It also can make your life as an instructor a lot easier because all the information is on Blackboard. The students can access it and they're not sending you 100 emails. So it does reduce your workload as well as provide a lot of access and resources for students. So access is really important. If possible, open your Blackboard course before classes begin. Allow students to go in there, and you can send a roster email. So you send an email to the roster of the course and say, hey, the course shell is open. Go ahead and check it out. The syllabus is there. Please read this before you come to the first day of class, right? And you can incorporate all of that ahead of time. And that way students will have it. So your syllabus will be uploaded. You've introduced yourself. You can even think about to make sure they read the syllabus, give them a little quiz on it. Or one lady I knew, instructor I knew, she used to do a scavenger hunt on her syllabus. And then another idea is a pre-semester check-in. Include a survey from Google Forms that's like, hey, how do you feel about taking this course? What do you hope to learn from this course? What have you found to be your best study method? What is something a previous instructor did that worked really well for you? These are questions that help you as an instructor kind of get a feel for what your classroom is like before you ever walk in the door. So that you might be like, maybe I'm going to change the way I present this because most of my students are going to get most of it this way. Preparing all of your lecture materials ahead of time. That's kind of I have a typo there. See, I should have reviewed. Lecture outlines, handouts. If you have any links that students are going to have to do activities in class, but on their laptops, make sure the links are working. All of that can be uploaded into Blackboard. So that's all in Blackboard. You don't have to worry about putting up a QR code or anything like that. The students all have access to it right there in Blackboard. So it provides accessibility. You can repeat your learning goals with each of these. It also allows access to supplemental materials. I heard someone say, oh, supplemental readings for my own. You can link those supplemental readings in Blackboard. Students automatically have access to it. In communication, there are several tools, but in communication, a good rule of thumb is when a student asks you something or to do something, or if they can do something, tell them to send it to you in an email in Blackboard. So you want documentation of everything that the students are asking of you, so that one, you can reference back to it to ensure that you provide them the right thing, and two, so that you have written evidence of the request if there's ever a grade appeal or they're like, hey, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. You just want to have everything in writing. By using Blackboard email, this is a really great way to ensure that it's all in one place, easily accessible and organized, and it's done by class. So it's easy to find. It also used the announcements. Announcements are one of the most underutilized parts of a learning management system. This is where you can really get inclusive. When I taught biology, I used to have, this is what science looks like. And every week I would highlight a underrepresented person in the sciences. So whether it was a female microbiologist or I had a Native American that was doing some research on fisheries and such. So I always tried to include to show students that, yes, you can do this too. Yes, this is part of who you can be. And try to highlight that throughout the course. So they would see themselves in the people that are doing the work in front of them. Introduce career ideas, representing diversity in your field of study. All of this can be done with announcements. You can upload photos and, you know, a podcast or a YouTube video, those sorts of things. Google Suite is also, we're at time. Okay. Google Suite is another really good one. I could do a whole workshop on Google Sheet, but it's a really great way to provide anonymity for students that don't want to speak up in class. It's also accessible. All students get a Google Suite account. And then we have the educational technology here that's available at BU, and there's an even more extensive list on the educational tech site that you have a link to in the document. Does anybody have any specific tech needs that they want to talk about? I'm happy to stay for a little bit and answer any of those questions.
Yeah.
Not yet? Okay, finally, if you'd like to do this, you can. This is called the Let's site. You can actually look up your classroom before you go, so you can see how many it holds, what it looks like, and what technology is available in it. So you can just use this QR code. You type in the room number you're going to be teaching in, and it'll give you all of that information about the class itself. And this is the resource document. We're going to email you the slides, and you can click on that. And that's a document that has links to not only everything we covered in here, but we added a whole bunch of other links around BU. At the bottom of it, I do want to say there's about 4 links that you could provide in Blackboard to your students that are student resource links. And that's a really helpful one for students. So I hate to rush through all of this, but that's pretty much it. That's where we're at. Sorry, that was a rush, but
also that there are resources on, so we know that we can look at.
yes, there's tons of resources. So we will provide that all to Debbie.
Yeah, I would definitely do it.
Yeah, and then Debbie can,
Show the slides.
yeah,
Yeah.
she'll send you the links to we'll provide her the links to everything.
Yeah.
And you'll have it.
I should say too that CTL is available. CTL is available for individual consults with faculty and postdocs. We will talk to you about any teaching related thing. And the CTL website also has a lot of resources on it.
Like you come up with your syllabus, if you want to, you know, come and meet with us about your syllabus, we can go over it with you and talk about, you know, your learning goals and how it's set up and making sure it's learner centered. Or if you need help with assignments or kind of readings or technology, any of that can schedule a consult with myself or Ben or Deb, and we're happy to help you any way we can.
We also have a small but powerful library. This is a little